All right, and here we go. We are live. Hello, friends. Today it's about agile leadership. Agile, maybe in brackets. We'll see what that actually means because, yeah, agile leadership is somehow a thing, but what is it? My pleasure today. We've got Michael K. Sahota, so that's somehow new to me. Michael Sahota, live from Canada here, right?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure sharing the space and time with you.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And yeah, I was thinking about should I introduce you? We're here on LinkedIn partially. We're also on other platforms, and people obviously can scan through your bio. But maybe you want to highlight some things, and then we'll dive right into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So probably what I'd say is my background's actually originally in artificial intelligence research. So how do we get complex systems working together, like get robots actually to operate in these kind of environments? And so then I transitioned to software, and so I've been in the agile world for 20 years, and I know what it's like to try to get projects working. I've worked as an executive, I've worked as an external trainer and coach, and so I know what it's like to get agile working, get projects working. And what I realize is that it's really hard, and that we need to go to a deeper level of understanding, to culture, and even deeper into leadership, and understanding what is this holistic view of change that we think about. And that's kind of what led me to write this, recently published book, Leading Beyond Change. Right. And so really most of our time right now is working with organizations. A lot of it is around leadership training around the globe. And so that's me in a nutshell.
Right. Cool. Thank you. And talking leadership, I know in the book you mention even a little bit more about your personal story, how you really, got into the leadership, making basically leadership sort of a center of gravity, I would say, is my interpretation of your whole work, and probably also being. So maybe just a few thoughts around how did you get into this leadership stance?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'd like to clarify something. I wouldn't say it's the center of gravity. I'd say it's more like the linchpin. Where there's a bit of a difference, because leadership is one aspect, culture is another aspect, change. There are many aspects about individuals and organizational functioning that interrelate and interpermeate to unlock a system. But leadership is kind of the place where we can have the most emphasis, the linchpin or the fulcrum, where everything, where we get the maximum pivot, right? I mean, you can try frameworks and things like that, but really leadership gives the maximum acceleration by focusing on that concept and how it relates to others. So how did I get here? Like it's kind of a strange thing, because I was actually trained as an engineer. I mean, I was more like the guy you lock in the back room and slide the pizza under the door, right? Not set up for talking to people, certainly not set up for leadership, even though I've got brilliance and genius ideas, not really good about bringing other people on the journey. So what happened is I found myself working as an agile coach, agile trainer, helping organizations change. And what I noticed is that I wasn't able to be as successful as I wanted to be. And I looked at the system and I said, well, what's the problem here? I go, well, when I have a leader, whether I'm dealing with a CEO, a CIO, a CTO, a manager, director, whatever their level of consciousness, whatever their level of evolution was, if they had a very progressive mindset, it would work really, really well. I mean, this is for 10 years now. I've been working as a CEC with the Scrum Alliance, right? It's a really high designation. But even with all that, I was stuck, because I realized that the only way to help these leaders evolve was to get agile working, to get high performance, to get the success I yearned for, and that certainly the organizations wanted, was to help these leaders evolve. And then I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, well, Michael, are you equipped to help these leaders evolve? And the answer I got back was, well, no, Michael, you're a well-intentioned asshole. You understand everything. You know how everything works. You can see all the connections, but the way you're showing up, you can't inspire anyone.
All right.
And so, yeah, so this is really the story I tell worldwide. It's like, and the reason I'm having this conversation with you, the reason I train leaders around the globe is because I went on my journey. I had this hypothesis: if I can change how I show up, I can change how other people show up. That was my kind of crazy hypothesis. Now we know it's just a very grounded principle. There's a saying from Yogananda: only a transformed person can transform the world.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'd say is, for anybody out there who wants to have the other people around them change, the other people around them show up better, to be more responsible, to show up as more powerful, capable leaders, it's possible. But it starts with our journey as a leader. When we evolve ourselves, then we can help others on that evolutionary journey.
Right. That's beautiful. And it actually brings me already to one point, because you mentioned workshops, trainings, and you work with a lot of leaders across. I think even with the online thing now, it's even easier for you to reach out to many organizations, large organizations. I know we work together because we host your workshops, and I know you work for banks and large organizations. How do you, where do you see, let's say, the lever for these participants, or for your clients, for your, however you call it, your the partners in conversation, leaders, to not only focus on tools and practices, because I think that is one thing, right? They come to a workshop, they probably want to hear, all right, tell me, how can I get through this mess and everything? But instead, look at themselves, because you just mentioned consciousness before. What do you think?
So what we do is we help people understand data. People understand connections. They understand their own experiences. The thing is, everybody knows this. Everyone's had an experience that when they treat people well, they perform better. And what we take, it's kind of basic common sense, right? I mean, it's common sense, but what people don't realize is, day to day, when we're in a management role in a business as usual kind of company, if we're leading a change initiative, whether we're a manager or some sort of change agent like an Agile coach or something, it doesn't matter what that role is. What happens, we're so used to this command and control behavior, we don't understand it when it's showing up in our own being. And so what we show people is cause and effect. You say, did you notice when you do this kind of thing, this is the outcome? Right? So really, really basic examples. Did you notice when you push your idea and you get resistance, you're the one creating that resistance, right? I mean, these are like very simple ideas, but when we connect people up with cause and effect, we show them how they're the problem and they're the solution. It actually, they come away liberated, empowered, because now they don't need to change anybody else, which is outside of their control anyway. But they discover that they can make shifts inside themselves to show up as a different kind of person with a different worldview, to create a different kind of outcome. Because we all know you can't change anyone else. You can only change yourself. But people don't understand the damage they're causing. And when people see the damage, they go, oh my goodness, I don't want to show up like this. I don't want to be this kind of leader. And then they're so inspired to put the investment into where it counts most, which is their own journey, their own evolution.
Yeah. That's a very important word you just used, because I think your work is a lot attached to evolutionary leadership, how I recognized it recently. You want to tell us a little bit more about this idea? Why evolutionary leadership?
Yeah, so that's great. So I am lazy. If I can reuse someone else's model, someone else's idea, I'll do that in a heartbeat, because I only want to get outcomes as fast as possible. If I could reuse the existing concepts of servant leadership, of transformational leadership, and those would get us to high performance, I would use them in a heartbeat. But they don't. Servant leadership, it's wonderful. I love it. It's 50 years old and it's time to be retired. There are parts of it that are very beautiful. There are parts of it that are actually red herrings and distractions. And it's ultimately, and this is what we put together in the book, is when we look at high performance organizations, high performance culture, high performance leadership, what happens is we understand it's actually this evolutionary journey, and that it's never done. That's the kind of the shift. That's why we coined the term evolutionary leadership, because it's an ongoing journey. And what we know is that the moment you stop your journey, you've stopped evolving, and there is no journey. There's no way you can bring anybody else along with it. Now, so the other thing is that it's really about, and this is the core of evolutionary leadership, is the choice to evolve oneself, right? And when we choose to evolve ourselves, we're walking the talk, we're modeling kind of beyond a growth mindset, what we actually call an evolutionary mindset, where we're not ready just to grow and learn, but we're ready to learn about ourselves as a human being, to work through our challenges, our limitations. And when we show up like that as a leader, wow, people are inspired. People come on the journey with us. That's how we light up other people around us.
Yeah. I want to invite everyone who is watching here, by the way, to drop in any comment, any question, because this is the opportunity to ask directly, to get into touch with Michael here directly.
Yeah, so we're going much more beyond kind of surface level talking, but empowering people and that kind of language. I mean, people are in their nature, when you treat, it's really about treating people like adults. People intrinsically have power. We just need to recognize in this, not about empowering them. They already have that power. It's about recognizing the power and capability within people and recognizing their sovereignty as human beings and allowing their brilliance to shine. And when we show up in this way, which is very different from servant leadership. In servant leadership, there's still this notion kind of managing, of treat your people well, bring it out. I mean, those are good notions, but it's about turning up the knob, to quote Spinal Tap, turning up the knob to 11. It's like we're on to this 10% difference that makes a 90% difference. Like, it's not that people have to learn a huge shift. It's about taking all the skills people have already developed over their whole careers and just having a little twist, like a little twist of lime and lemon that unlocks the whole drink.
Right. It reminded me, just because you mentioned the evolving part. I think Keith Richards, guitarist of the Rolling Stones, recently somewhere mentioned, "I'm not getting old, I'm evolving." So that's quite interesting. And I think he's already around 80, and growing his perspective. That's also why we call this spotlight, because spotlight obviously shines a light somewhere, and it's a conscious choice, right? Where you put a light on. And you can't always see everything, but you can start putting more lights into different spots and then see how that influences your consciousness. Or
so that's a great point. I mean, what we're talking about here is when we turn the spotlight inward on our own evolution, our own consciousness. Like, because we talk about Agile, this being Agile versus doing Agile. Right. Being is actually our inner state of being, our worldview, and we describe this as consciousness, what our level of consciousness is, and it's an ongoing thing, and it's actually very important. Like, this is not a term used lightly. Like, my partner, co-author of the book Leading Beyond Change, Audrey and I, we both studied consciousness in India. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, months and months of effort on our own evolution, right? Because this is how I could get out of just being an engineer, right? Of the person who's, slide pizzas under the door because they can't talk to anyone, right? And so what I know from my own evolution and what we see from all the people we've trained all over the world is this stuff works when we put the effort into where we have the most control, the most influence, and we have the right tools. And that's part of what we equip people with, is these evolutionary tools. When we shine the spotlight there, the ROI is extraordinary. It's just, it's beyond. I mean, coaching other people, it's helpful, but like we're talking about leadership, of how do we show up in a way where people want to follow us. That's how you know you're a leader, because people are following you.
Yeah. Leadership is obviously not new. I mean, there's tons of research, probably 100 years of research and publications. And at the same time, we recognize there is more and more talking about leadership today, or has been. And what is different? Do you see a difference between, for example, McGregor, Theory X, Epsilon? I think that was the 50s, 60s, right? And then there are many other, even companies out there who started in the 60s. But where do we see the difference between these days and today, and even moving forward?
Yeah, well, actually, I love McGregor's Theory X, Theory Y, because that's the minimum table stakes. Like, for a team member, forget about a leader, but a team member, are people in your team showing up Theory Y no matter what? Monday mornings, Friday afternoons, like when you hit the rough spot, that's the minimum. And what we're teaching leaders is like, hey, honestly, look at yourself. Are you showing up as Theory Y at a minimum every day, all day long? And people go, wait a second, woo, I'm not. So if I'm not showing up to your why, how can I ask the people around me? And then we help them get as well. And this is, I think, where there's a huge gap. There's a huge, huge community about looking at very evolved organizations, teal, exponential organizations, but there's a missing gap. They talk about flat organizations and they've left leadership out of the picture. In fact, there's a huge mistake in Frederick Laloux's book, or oversight, because he's shown the attention elsewhere. Beautiful, beautiful work. Right. But we need to bring the attention back to leadership, because how we lead is how we amplify growth in the organization. Right? We want people to lead on teams. Like a self-organized team will not be very good unless everyone's capable of leading when they need to lead. So we actually need leaders at all levels. So leadership cannot be forgotten. So these very progressive communities have left leadership behind. And the more traditional research you've been speaking about, the traditional work on leadership, yeah, there's lots of work on leadership. But what we've gone to the root. I mean, people are starting here, surface level issues, dropping down. We've dropped down a couple of layers. And probably the key word that I'd use to differentiate our work is one word: ego. E-G-O. Our work is laser targeted to unlock what's going on in the ego so people can show up at their best. So we can take out the damaging behaviors of the ego, because it turns out we all have one. And a lot of leadership work, there's a lot of really great leadership work that kind of talks about this in a very surface way without getting to the root cause. And once we get to the root cause, everything can get unlocked. And so that's what I'd say is like a core differentiator. I mean, there's some really, really beautiful work that comes at it, I'd say kind of sort of orthogonally. I think actually two things: ego plus consciousness. And those go actually hand in hand. That consciousness is actually the technology of working through ego issues that we all have as leaders to show up as the kind of leader that can inspire people. Right. And so that's where we've kind of come front and center to something radically new that I haven't seen anywhere else. And I've looked around it. I mean, again, like I said, if I can take what somebody else has done and just use that to create extraordinary, I'm all in.
No, that's really interesting, because as you just outlined, you're obviously differentiating rank from behavior, from evolution of behavior, because in German, English is nice because leadership is obviously not just rank. It's a little bit confusing because it is rank, and at the same time it is an act of, right? In German, it's like Führung, right? And the Führungskräfte, so the people who are in charge. And what you're talking about is like creating other people who are getting into the lead and leading literally every day. And the more people we get like that, obviously, I mean, that sounds like a challenge too, right? Because then they obviously need to understand, okay, how do we make decisions together, right? Because leadership is not only about decisions, it's then being together and evolving together. And then you mentioned purpose a lot of times in your work, to move together into the direction of purpose and understand how we make that happen, right? Collaboration comes into play with us. So it's interesting.
Ja, Führungskraft, sehr schön. Ja,
ja, exactly.
Genau, was wir sprechen hier. Yeah. So it's exactly what we want. It's all about leadership craft, leadership ability, right? And it's a different. And what's going on is people don't understand what good leadership is. They think leadership is telling people what to do. Well, that's command and control.
Yeah.
Even things like servant leadership, the leader has to have a vision and like convince them and tell everyone else about it. That's still command and control. More evolved leaders who hold a higher consciousness understand that it's about going on the journey together, co-creating a shared purpose. They might have some idea, but that idea may not be the idea that'll take everyone on the journey. So what happens is, but the only way we can let go of what we think is best and go with what the group understanding is and let go of that is the only possible way we can do that is when we get our ego under control. That's why we say this whole journey is about understanding the ego and what's happening with it.
It just rang a bell because last week I met a client where the CEO literally asked, it was actually more about flow. It was more about flow systems, and asked, what about me? I'm the CEO, and I'm obviously in the way of, many, many people, because I have to make so many decisions and they're held back. What shall I do?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously he was more thinking about limiting WIP. How would we establish a flow system? And that basically rang my bell, just telling him, yeah, get rid of all these decisions you make, right? It's this sort of, as long as you are the one who needs to make all the decisions, that's a choice. And I read a quote today from another guy who's working with a quite large company, and he says, leaders don't make decisions. That made me a little bit nervous, because it's interesting, right? I'm used to, well, leaders make decisions, important ones. But he said, leaders hire decision makers. Somehow I love this, right? It's a little bit black-white, but it points to an issue, right?
Yeah, so we've got a whole chapter dedicated to that. It's called the paradox of power. And there's no, if you think the answer is that the leader should give commands or the leader should give away commands, you're missing the mark. That's low consciousness behavior. As we evolve our consciousness and our ability to hold multiple conflicting worldviews simultaneously, we understand there's a paradox here. And it's about understanding the nuances of the paradox. So in each situation, we know when to hold the power and use our power for the good of the system, or when to share power. I mean, ultimately, what we see in these high-performance teal organizations is that leaders just hold space. But the only way they can do that is when people show up as theory Y++ and act like responsible adults, which doesn't happen in most organizational systems. So it's true that we want to move decisions to the edges. We want to share power as a general intent. But we only want to share power with people who are going to use that power responsibly. And that's the best decision. And even if I have someone who's reporting to me who's really good, who can make a very capable decision, if it's a critical decision, I might actually keep that decision or do it together with them. That's why we actually invented this technology decision cards to go with it, to help people understand the nuance. And that's the difference that we see with evolutionary leaders, is they understand that learning how to navigate this conflict of paradox of power, this seeming conflict, is what the evolutionary journey is. And the very naive attempt is to say, look, tell me what the answer is. That's a very low consciousness approach. What we do with people is say, look, we can't tell you what the answer is here, but we can give you the journey, because the only way you can navigate on this journey of understanding the paradox is for you to evolve. It's kind of like, it's like, if your child asks you, your 5-year-old or 6-year-old says, Daddy, how do they get the spaceship into outer space? And you can give them some high-level concepts, but until they actually study physics and mathematics and jet propulsion and understand, certain physical things, they can't really understand technically how the spaceship gets into outer space, which means they can't get a spaceship into outer space. So if you want to be a leader that understands the paradox of power, it means going on a learning journey to understand what are the principles of power, of holding power, using power, and what that is. And that's a learning journey.
Right. So one thing interesting here, thing that comes up quite often, is this idea of, do we have too many managers and not enough leadership, right? Or even leaders. And that brings me to this point, because obviously managers, even managing something tends to get a solution, to basically get a solution at the table, get something fixed, get something done. And in your work, and I need to point to your book, by the way, you speak a lot about VUCA, and I love one of the letters most, which is ambiguity, because ambiguity is this sort of, I don't know, left, right, middle, and isn't this one key to say I can live with ambiguity? I can't even know, and I need to live with this inattention, which I might feel on a daily basis, because probably most of the managers, most of the leaders out there have this problem, no matter what industry they're in.
Yeah, so absolutely agree. Most organizations are filled with managers, not with leaders. Absolutely. And that's a real problem. That's where the low performance is. And this is a function, we're coming from this command and control paradigm where we're used to hierarchy, and we train people to be managers. There's a famous saying, what do people do to learn how to run an organization? They go to an MBA program,
exactly.
Masters of Business administration. So we're training people that your role is to manage. And then we get them in the workplace and they're managing. Whose fault is that? This is what we're training managers to do. So basically, there's a whole retraining needed to shift people from management to leadership. And when you understand leadership, you'll know sometimes you need to manage. Sometimes you need to give orders, you need to make things happen, and so on. And other times you need to hold space. But you'll understand that there's a spectrum of what it takes to create high performance, what it takes to unlock your people. And so you know when to use your power, when not to. So that's really the shift, is that people and organizations are horribly equipped to create success. They actually just do not have the right training, and traditional training leadership programs do not give them the right training, because what we're talking about is working our way to this command and control habit that they don't even know they have, that ultimately is based in their ego, that requires a shift in their consciousness. It's not their fault. Right? So that's why, go to the organization, see managers operating very poorly, creating all sorts of damage. It's not their fault. It's not. They've not been. And Agile is just part of the problem, because it's, we got it. Agile, we've got it. We're going to train up all the teams on Agile, and we're going to, Spotify model you, and, Safify you, or, some other framework you. And that doesn't work. That's why we created what we call the Shift 314 Evolutionary Leadership Framework. It's more like an unframework. It's the scaffolding and tools needed to start evolving an organizational system. It's called the self. Why is it called the self? Because it's about the ego, right? So which is our self, right? And until we actually start working with that, and not just ourself, all these change programs will be much more effective when we understand how everybody else's self work, and create change programs that work with the ego of everybody else that's involved, instead of fighting with it and creating all sorts of damage and waste and conflict. It's really about understanding how people work.
Yeah. We'll come to this point, but before, a shameless plug here, just for people to see. What I have here is an iPad. So we are not giving away an iPad, but on the iPad, you see a book, and Michael has it too. It's Michael's latest book. And it's an amazing book because it basically has a lot of content. I was scanning through it in the past week. It's fresh out from the press. And I'm happy to get it tomorrow. So with your dedication, so it's landed in my post office. And what's in there is tons of those, as you call it, patterns. For example, there's a whole concept. There is this framework, as you call it, and a couple of those things we already mentioned. So I really want to point that it's actually, it's just worth the money. Everybody reading it, amazing insights, amazing triggers. It might trigger your inner self, because you just mentioned self, and then you decide what to do about it. Lean back and listen to your inner voice, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you.
But there is one interesting. Now I wanna. It's not critical. I wanna attach to it this notion of high performance organization, because you're mentioning it very often. I know we've been hosting a workshop since a couple of years now, and I still remember. It's not anymore there. I think this picture of this nice Mercedes-Benz as a sports car, right? And with a very beautiful environment, beautiful picture, as a sort of a metaphor for an organization, for example, a high-performance organization. Now, my question actually is somehow, because I'm looking at, like you, Michael, and we had discussions already, at the world around us, right? The more challenging demands sometimes people don't see, because they just say, hey, we need to get rid of the combustion engine. We need to get e-cars out on the streets. But obviously a problem is not this or that. A problem is climate change. A problem is the pandemic and everything. And we see this terrible behavior in society. So I'm feeling a little bit challenged. And at the same time, I love the thought process around it. What about high performance organizations, or what else do we need? How do we need to think beyond? So in this case, I love consciousness more than high performance, but where would you place the high performance organization in the bigger picture?
Yeah, so that's a really, really great question. Let me just answer the part about performance first. So we use that car as a metaphor to pace people from where they are, which is in mostly red or orange organizations, sometimes green. And in those organizational systems, it's all about performance and success. So it's about pacing people from their current reality. The other thing is we're actually starting to talk about the ego there. Most people don't notice it. We say, well, everybody wants this shiny car, right? Because it's a symbol of success, and everybody wants to be successful. That's the ego that wants to be successful. We just have different definitions of what success is. So we're already starting to use that to link into the ego. It's coming into people in very subliminal layers. So they're not going to get it. And it's also an electric car, right? It's not just any car. So it's an environmentally friendly, high performance car that screams success. I mean, who wouldn't want this, right? So that's what we're doing, is we're having people connect with that notion of, well, that desire inside of themselves from day one to, how do I be successful as a leader, looking after my family? Because you can have it all. You can look after the people, you can get high performance. And what we see is these, so-called TL organizations. I think the term's misdefined. There's a whole other thing about how to redefine it correctly. But evolution organizations, ones that are more evolved, have higher levels of performance. They're more able to thrive in a VUCA world. They have higher levels of performance. So the word performance is not a problem. It goes all the way across the spectrum. So coming back to society, part number 2, society. So our view is very straightforward. We're in a global crisis at many levels. And the fear creates a drop in our intelligence. And ultimately, as a society, and this is a view we have at Shift 314, is that humanity, for it to survive, needs a fundamental shift in consciousness. The problems that we have, because everyone is operating locally from their egoic perspective. So whether you're on a team or part of a society or a nation or even the world, we can't solve the problems because we're so focused on ourselves, our own interests, our own egoic perspective. So until there's a shift in consciousness where that starts to soften, we can take our perspective plus a broader perspective. We're not, as humanity, going to be able to solve the problems. So this shift in consciousness that we're bringing about in business is necessary for the survival of humanity. And really, businesses are the most opportune place because there's so much focus on performance, right? And so, but here's the good news: by focusing on evolving consciousness, performance goes up. So it's a win-win. We can save the planet and we can get better performance and our bonuses and get our kids through college and all that good stuff.
Right. That's nice, because there's, in your book, there's also this, let's say, dichotomy between people first and stakeholders first, or what do you say? It's not stakeholders. What is it? Organization, whatever.
Customers first, or profits first,
right?
Or
this whole profit thing, right? And I was sometimes thinking about it, and I loved your intervention there to say, well, it's, either or. In a complex scenario, it's so hard to say what makes sense to comes first. So in your book, I read, it's a very clear people first, because everything will follow there. And you bring a lot of examples which just work this way beautifully. And then I just thought it's true, because first of all, without people, you can't have a product and anything else. It's not working the other way around to say, oh, we've got a nice credit or a nice sponsor or a nice whatever investor, and then with the money we get people like engaged. And no, it's usually the other way around. Without people, it doesn't work. So I love this somehow to say, no, there's a clear cut people first. And this, coming back to our previous question, would actually, if you're doing it right, would lead to, what do people consider important beyond profit, right? To say, but we want to have sustainable products. We want to have good relationships. We want to have transparency with our clients. We don't want to cheat and everything alike. It's just opening so many doors.
Right. So of course that can only happen with an evolution in consciousness, right? I mean, we see all this whole B corporation movement in the United States. It's like, some of it's really nice, some of it's a joke. Yeah. Because without a shift in consciousness, you can't treat your stakeholders well.
Yeah.
You can try to do it because you think it's a good thing, but ultimately, until your consciousness evolves and you can deal with this fear center for survival inside of your body, it's going to take you back to making poor choices. My son, one of my kids has this phrase, poor life choices. Yeah. Managers, leaders make poor choices again and again and again because they're conditioned into this lower consciousness, survival-oriented way of thinking. And what we need to get these broader, B corporations and broader outlook for how do we create an ecosystem where everyone wins. But that's how nature works. Nature's not survival of the fittest or the strongest. It's survival of the most cooperative. And organizations that have this evolved consciousness and understand how to create ecosystems where everyone's a winner, where suppliers are taken care of. It's not about getting the lowest cost part. It's about building long-term relationships, about a win-win. That's the shift from winning, oh, we want to win, to we want to win with others.
Right.
But that's moving from me thinking to we thinking to this broader understanding, which is a shift of consciousness. People can't just have that phrase, oh, let's think about we, let's think about the group, let's think about the greater cause. I mean, there are people who have that inside of themselves as this notion, either environmentally or societally or environment. But look at how we treat people every day. It's only some sort of idealized notion. When we look at how we treat people every day, we're not able to hold that up consistently without growth, without our own inner evolution.
Exactly. You mentioned basically leaders need to unlearn, right? It's this stuff they bring from MBA courses. I mean, it's okay because you want to run your finance properly and everything you have to do, but administration is not leadership. It's different things. Now, one thought I have, and I'd be really interested in your opinion because it's only guessing. We're 21. 21 is actually, we're progressing. What do you think about the future leaders and I don't know, today's graduates, guys who are into business studies or starting their studies? Do you see a potential shift already there so that there is less effort to unlearn stuff? Or do you see a system which is just generating its followers on and on again, and we have to unlearn and unlearn and unlearn again? So are we in a phase of generation shift, or is there an opportunity?
So pretty much what I'd say is that younger people have an advantage, a natural advantage on their own evolution. They're already often at a more evolved state. If you look at the whole challenge with millennials, what you'll see is that millennials are more evolved. So they go, yeah, I don't want to work in this dumb work environment. This doesn't make any sense, right? It's been going on for like over a decade now, right? So younger people tend to be more evolved. But what happens is we condition them, not just in MBA school. We condition them in the MBA school, and then we bring them into these corporate environments where survival means they have to adapt to this low consciousness way of functioning. And if they're true to their values, what's important for them, they hit the eject button and they get out. So all the ones who have natural good instincts that are not able to be conditioned and still have that kind of good notion inside themselves, they leave. They leave. So what are we left with? We're left with people who are so conditioned they can function in these regressive traditional business environments. And so we're self-selecting the people who will keep those systems locked in their traditional way of functioning. And it's horrible. It's a real problem for leaders. So what we want to do is help them go, wait a second, we've got a real problem here. We're addicted to this command and control habit. And unless we change it, we're not going to light up people. We're not going to create environments where people want to work. And our days are numbered as an organization. We're not going to survive this VUCA curve we're facing.
Yeah.
So, and once that survival instinct comes in and there's a desire for real change, then something can happen. And that's really our basic ingredient. We don't have to work with top leadership. We work with leaders at any level of the organization. We're talking about a fractal framework of what we've created here. So if there's a manager who wants to change, great. If there's a director, great. If there's a VP, great. But they can create change within their part of the organizational system. And it creates this kind of ripple effect through the organization. So it doesn't have to start with the top leadership. It can start with any place in the organization, which is a radically different model of change than is what's been gone on in current, these horrific transformation programs that are perpetrated with organizations today.
Yeah. So what you just mentioned, I mean, this scenario I love so much about Novartis. You probably know the CEO, just with his unbossing strategy, where he just started to break with old habits and just said, we need to unboss our whole system. And obviously started with himself a lot and just tremendous stuff going on in a very, very conservative industry and at the same time company. But what I heard was like, there is potential when we talk about next generations, but there is still the threat of the system sucking them in, right? Which sounds like a call for HR or any company to say, don't hire for culture fit, but for culture shift, right? To say, try to get fresh air in.
Yeah. So Yeah, I mean, we've got a really good blog posts. We got lots of really good blog posts on these topics, like leader versus boss, and who are you inspiring, and so on. But
we can put them in the
this
comments afterwards for those who are watching this afterwards, and I'm happy to put them in the comment section.
Yeah. All right. And it's easy. It's shift314.com, which is our company /blog. It's straightforward. But anyway, so so let me just come back to that. So the thing is, if you hire people for culture shift into an existing structure, are you creating peace or are you creating tension in the system? You're actually amplifying the tension. What happens when there's amplified tension is people are not safe.
Right.
When people are not safe, the blood supply to the frontal cortex starts to go down, and their ability to reason and think and learn and grow shuts down. Right? Because everybody who's not on the culture shift program has a big target on their back saying your days are numbered here. And we don't advocate anything like that at all. We advocate something much more responsible, which is how do you compassionately take people on the journey? How do you bring people and help them evolve in the journey? And when you take that more safety-oriented approach, compassionate, caring approach, that is an evolved consciousness. You do this within the organization.
Right.
Some people won't want to go on the journey, but you'll give them time. You'll give them chances. It won't be like the first move. It'll be like 2, 3, 4, 5 moves later. They'll realize, this isn't for me. And you'll look after them, give them a good package and so on. But a lot of what happens in very well-intentioned, and I don't know the details of what's happening in Novartis, but what's required is a leader who can create other leaders. What required is a rapid boot and shift of people's consciousness. And that's why we take people out of the matrix of the business into a training environment so they can experience something different. They can get the shift, they get the mindset shift, and then support them as they go back into their work environments. They don't lose that shift, right? Just like you need to train like an agile team. No one would just train them and say, good luck, guys. But managers face a much harder job. So we actually create a program where we train them and then give them support afterwards so they can have the integration and support to retain that shift. Otherwise, it starts to fade off as they get re-indoctrinated back into business as usual.
Yeah, that basically brings me to this workshop you mentioned as a possible starting point. I'm just putting it here as one example. There are many more on your website. Puts me a little bit into this promise where we said agile leadership. What do you see actually with this agile? I mean, it's quite funny. Do we need it? Do we need agile leadership, or is it just leadership?
So I wrote a book 9 years ago now, how agile is itself a culture system. So if you understand that agile is a culture system, you'll understand that agile is about moving towards a higher performance culture system, which means it's not about agile anymore.
Right.
So that's why our training is called Agile in quotes, culture and leadership, because it's about how do you evolve high performance that's compatible with agile. That's why our book mentions the word agile 5 times.
Nice.
It's not about agile, because if you're trapped in the agile paradigm, there's a technical word we use for this. It's called doomed. You are doomed. If you're stuck with the agile blinders on, you're doomed, because you're not opening up to the broader world of culture, the broader world of leadership. And what we can say is we finesse the whole problem by saying agile leadership is the kind of leadership that can lead to an evolved culture where agile will actually flourish and work, right? Which means it's not about agile anymore.
Yeah. Now, I'm coming to basically to the end of our conversation with a final question. The workshop we just mentioned is highly on demand. I know they're usually sold out pretty decent with about quite a lot of people and from all industries and really great places. I've been there. It's really a nice experience, an amazing experience. But you're doing more, right? Together with Audrey, your company, your teams.
Yeah.
If I'm a leader, how could I imagine how this work goes with you and with your teams to say, okay, I'm now in a workshop, probably a few coins dropped to understand, okay, there is something about me, but we know 2-3 days that doesn't sustainably change anyone, right? What's the further journey? What do you see then to say, all right, I mean, first of all, I need to want to it. There needs to be a desire and intent, but what's then?
Yeah, so I'll describe it this way. what we have is really I'll say this two different ways. One is this book, 400 pages, almost 400 pages, is about 10% of what we have for IP. So like the current introductory level courses that we do publicly is just a fraction of what we offer privately with organizations. We actually have a whole training series so that quarter by quarter, leaders can go through training and get coaching support afterwards so it sticks. So we actually take people through these kind of deeper journeys. And ultimately, and this is what the key differentiator for us is this technology of consciousness that we've created to understand what are the workings of ego, how do we evolve our consciousness? Because a lot of stuff is, again, focused much more on surface level behavioral type stuff. We're digging down to the roots and undoing the roots. So we get this broad generative shift in many different aspects of how people show up. And this is stuff we learned again in India and based on wisdom traditions from around the globe. And this is Audrey's deep experience. Like my background's in organizations and systems. Her background is in personal growth and transformation. She's actually formally trained as a medical healer and has healed stage 4 cancer in multiple people. And so so her ability to work and create shifts at the inner level, not just the mind, but the integrated mind body system, is really just beyond anything that is usually talked about in typical leadership training.
Right. So that's actually the point. Consciousness, and that's not only skills, it's not only these typical horizontal skills that we sometimes say, right? Tools, it's really about yourself, your inner journey, so that you're getting basically prepared and ready for, guiding others, being a leader for others, and basically create an environment where leaders can flourish, right? It's creating this culture.
And it's not hard to understand what the inner shift is. Like when someone proposes an idea, how do we react to it as a leader? Are we open? Are we excited about it? Or do we think about what do we think the right answer is and try to put our idea forward, right? That's our ego. That's our level of consciousness. Unless we tame the ego, we're not going to be able to create the shift. And another great example is this book we wrote on emotional science. Unless leaders have an understanding of how their emotional system works and are able to navigate it effectively, what kind of leader are they showing up as? A reactive one. That's what kind of leader. And if you're showing up as a reactive leader, you'll have reactive people reporting to you. And that's not going to get you high performance.
Okay, so a couple of thoughts, hopefully for everyone here who listened in. And again, I want to point to your new book because it is really a treasure of ideas. Nobody needs to go to a workshop or anything. Feel free to just grab the book first of all and see what's all in there. Tons of good, interesting, triggering thoughts, advice, whatever you call it. It's a framework again, but you can treat it whatever you like. And from there, I want to thank you, Michael, for your time, for having this conversation. And I'm looking forward to more inspiration, because I'm getting inspired from what you do, what you say, and how things evolve. Looking forward to the evolution of our relationship. And thank you very much.
Me too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. And vielen Dank. Das tut mir sehr leid, hier zu sein. So thank you so much.
Es tut mir sehr leid. It's the other way around. You were happy because es tut mir leid. Amazing, you're speaking.
Oh, that's that?
It's like, es hat mich sehr gefreut.
Es hat mich sehr gefreut. Yeah.
Yes.
I need to spend more time with you in Austria, so my German gets better.
I'm looking forward that we can get out of
that way.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to in-person workshops again, because it's still probably, especially for this topic, a different environment. Thanks so much, Michael. Stay safe and see you soon.
For sure. Thank you. Bye-bye.